the worst position to be in is that you're in the profession and AI is done to you. And even worse than that is it's done past you. Their greatest risk to their business is not their competitors, but it's the 13-year-old young student in their room in a developing country somewhere who will have exactly the same access to all of these technologies that they do as an entire organisation.
How do you see AI shaping the role of project manager maybe over the next few years? Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Project Flux podcast. I'm here again with Yoshi, having flown solo last week. I'm really pleased you could join me this week, Yoshi.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job last week, mate. It was really clear,
Well,
really good.
It's never the same. It's never the same without you, and I'm sure the listeners feel exactly the same. So it's really, really great to have you back. And we have got a real fun-packed episode. A heck of a lot has gone on again this week, and I really don't know how we're going to fit it all in before we get to a brilliant interview we had with Nicola Benjamin, who is the founder of Project Management Global, and really, really excited in that interview to make a huge announcement, actually, something I'm really, really excited about. So do stay tuned for that. Before we get into the newsletter and the big stories of the week, just again, I'd like to give a big thank you to Construct AI, our sponsors. Wonderful, wonderful product. Now, I recommend everyone to go and try that out. The links, as always, are in the show notes. So where the hell do we start this week, Yoshi? I mean, it's just ridiculous, the things that have happened. We've had the playbook, the government playbook. We've had the AI summit that's happened in Paris. We've had the Perplexity release.
2 releases, yeah.
Yeah, 2 releases. We've had Sam Altman talking about GPT-5 and GPT 4.5, and then loads of other things between that. So we're not going to be able to cover everything in loads of detail because there's just too much that's happened. But we'll try our best to cover the big stories, if you like. And I think probably the best place to start, if it's okay, is with the AI summit. So the AI summit happened in Paris last week, and it's quite important. Well, it's quite important for a number of reasons, but mainly because for me, this is now becoming, top of the agenda for governments and what have you. And it was attended by some very, very key figures, including the Vice President of the US, J.D. Vance. And a lot of you might have seen in the news that he gave quite a passionate speech in Munich a couple of days afterwards about what he thinks about European security. But he was equally controversial, if you like, in his speech around AI. And he was basically saying that now is the time. It was a very passionate speech. We've put the video in the newsletter. He's saying this is an opportunity that we must seize. And without saying it, although he pretty much did say it, he's basically saying to Europe, stop, take your hands out and just get on with this, because this is the only chance you've got. And I think a really interesting thing that's come out the back of it is that the UK have not signed this agreement along with a lot of the other European powers, thereby aligning itself more with America on this global AI agreement, because they both think that it's compromising potential advances in AI. So what did you make of it all? Is this America going gung-ho and we should be cautious, or is this actually the right kind of decision to really grab this opportunity? Because America are by far leaps ahead of anyone in Europe. It's just basically America and China, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of both, right? America know that they're leaders in this space. And having seen what happened with DeepSeek, I think America responded quite well, especially within OpenAI, right? They made O3 a lot more accessible. And you can look at the performance of O1 and O3, and it's ridiculously impressive. Okay, so they've grown that level of confidence. They are now saying we want to lead, we want to continue to lead the world within the information age, within AI. And they are recognizing that the EU are stifling innovation and they don't want to halt that. So this is why JD Vance was so passionate about his conversation. And I think it's kind of leaning to the idea that there is so much potential to drive the impact within society and the economy, right? And introducing such harsh regulations, especially around the deployment of AI systems, because he says that in doing this, you actually support a lot of the major AI incumbents and actually prevent smaller AI startups from actually deploying solutions because you're putting so many regulatory hurdles in the way.
Yeah,
So he
that
actually
makes
leans
sense.
in with that angle, and it's incredibly important. And funnily enough, the EU are the ones who are the main blockers in this sense. Rightly so, they're keeping in the mind to not allow AI safety and ethics to fall behind. But then the rest of the world are now playing catch up with seeing the potential of it. So they're recognizing the potential that America already seen. That's why Macron's now putting 100 billion into France's or Paris's supercharged AI infrastructure.
Yeah, and funny enough, even though JD Vance is basically saying we're a bit backwards in Europe in terms of AI development. Mistral, which is a French company, has released a model called Le Chat, which it performs incredibly well. So in terms of Europe, France are leading the pack with that and this investment. So it's kind of it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? In some ways, they're being cautious and they're looking at this act, and we've got all the kind of hurdles, I suppose, like the GDPR and the Digital Services Act to get over. But on the other hand, they are investing very, very heavily in artificial intelligence. So it's just a different approach. I don't think anyone's saying AI is not going to be a significant part of the future. There's just a different approach. America's very, let's just grab this opportunity whilst we can, whilst the EU's a little bit more cautious in their approach. And I think there was a blog written by Dario from
Yeah.
Anthropic, basically. I think it was an interesting one because he's saying what we need to lead AI development to prevent authoritarian regimes from gaining a strategic advantage, which is what you just said. So there's so many kind of bits at play with this, and it's not as simple as saying yes, just go for it, or no, don't go for it, because there are so many kind of outside forces at play that we're not even considering at the moment.
Yeah, and the funny thing that I found quite humorous was, so the UK are saying that they want to have an AI sovereignty, which would probably is one factor as to why they haven't signed this agreement, right? They want to be able to achieve what they achieve with DeepMind and a lot of the other, more progressive technological advancements that have come from the UK, and they always liken it back to DeepMind. But France have Mistral, and Mistral is one of the biggest independent leading AI labs, right? The UK don't really have anything like that. I know Synthesi just had their physical office space rented now in Regent's Park or something, right, in London, but it's not on the same level.
No, no.
The UK are kind of biting off more than they can chew without really having shown what we can actually achieve. I think it's more so a ploy to side with America in that sense. But if we do pull off the AI sovereignty, so we actually build intelligence, intellectual property, and drive technological advancement as a country, that will put us in a good position. But we don't have that much credibility or recent hard-won credibility in the last few years or decade or so. So it's we're kind of clutching at straws in that sense. So it's an
Well,
interesting.
we're great at the research. I mean, a lot of the research that's gone on is through the UK institutions, but it's the actual putting it into practice. It often ends up at Silicon Valley or in China. So you're right. And France actually with Mistral. I mean, even though I haven't used that model too much, I don't know if you've used it a lot. It does go to show that it's not necessarily game over for the EU. There are other ways through, and maybe there is room for more than sort of two or three big players. Maybe Mistral will become a very kind of niche kind of model that's used for specific tasks or for people who are worried about the kind of doomsday scenarios that we talk about quite a lot. So I think it's good that this summit went ahead. Obviously, a lot of politicians, a lot of talk, but the big takeaway from me was this divergence between the European position and the America stroke UK, because I think, like you say, UK is siding more with America. It hasn't signed the agreement. There's a divergence happening there, isn't there?
Yeah, but the thing is, it's to diverge to then converge, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're diverging in your approach and your methodologies in terms of what you believe, whether you lean more towards innovation or you lean more towards ethics.
Mm.
The thing is, ethics needs more convergence than innovation does, right? Because you can compete and you can develop these models independently or with small collaborations, and you can drive up the capability that we have in intelligence today. But in terms of ethics, everyone has to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So that's why JD Vance and also Dario said, and Dario brought out what that report of 100 or so AI experts who again have reinforced that we need to be better with AI safety alignment. We need to make these models more robust. We need to make them more interpretable. We need to have more control over them, and we need to understand what we actually mean by ethics. And those four things we don't actually have a clear grasp on, especially as these models are becoming smarter and smarter.
Yeah, absolutely. So all this stuff you can see in the newsletter. We got a video actually of JD Vance's speech. We've got a link to Dario's blog and all the other information you need to know. In terms of projects, like just before we go to the next story, I mean, this is important because it's going to start showing a divergence again between how you can deliver projects in different regions between America and between Europe, and how you can utilize AI. So it's important for you guys to know about the developments here, because we do live in a global world, and if you're delivering, what's going to happen is you're going to have to use AI differently in different parts of the world.
Yeah, of course. And also,
things are moving.
and even in terms of like construction projects, right? Data centers are becoming a hot thing. You have Google, who have just denounced or they removed their label in terms of using AI for certain more violent.
Yeah, we covered that last week. Of the whole,
Right?
they taken away the nuclear.
Yeah,
option,
exactly.
which
So
is very worrying.
there'll be an impact on projects on many different planes that I think people need to understand, and it will change the way that we deliver them, but also change the way that we operate once the projects have been delivered. So it's a systemic impact that people need to just take away what's relevant to them.
Yeah, and we haven't even covered it yet. Talking about Dario, there's rumour that Claude 4 is going to be released any time now. So that's one thing that we haven't had time to look at, or hasn't come out yet. So hopefully that will be next week. But let's talk about some of the other big announcements this week. So what do you want to start with? Do you want to look at Perplexity, or do you want to talk about Sam's blog and the big tease of a GPT?
So I think Sam's blog is a good place to start, because we are talking about, it's more of a reflection piece, right? So even the EU summit was a way to come back and say, look, what's happening in AI and what do we need to do to govern these things more effectively? And we can look at Sam's observations from his 3 observations blogs to understand a bit more where we are today.
Do you want to give a summary of that then?
Yeah, so he speaks about 3 things, and they are somewhat obvious if you have been listening to the podcast, the Flux podcast, but one's around the scaling hypothesis, right? And it's the idea that as we scale data, networks, training times, we can deliver much stronger and more advanced intelligence, right? We can grow the IQ of what AI can deliver today. And he says that the capability is proportionate to the log of its resources. So as you scale these things, so will the intelligence scale proportionally. Now, with the increasing intelligence, we're also then driving down cost. So as we progress and we deliver more and more smarter models, we also deliver them in more efficient ways. We also have much more efficient hardware and technologies and chips, right? And just examples of that are Cerebras systems for Perplexity, that we'll cover in a second. That story, they're using different kind of chips. Amazon, will be powering the new Anthropic chips, and Nvidia have got their own chips, and OpenAI are releasing their own chips, right? And there's the mixture of experts approach within how we develop these models, and reinforcement. All these different things are making it a lot more efficient. So GPT-4, or I think GPT-4 Turbo or something, is now 150 times cheaper than what it was a few years back. Yeah. So effectively, it's Moore's law for everything. Now you take
it's more laws time 1,000, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, exactly, right? So you take these 2 things, exponentially growing intelligence, and then significantly driving down cost. And then you also say that we can then have super exponential impact on society and the economy. Because of that.
This is nothing new, though. This is exactly what Ray Kurzweil sort of described in his book, The Singularity is Near.
Yeah, right. But then
back in 2006.
Yeah, but the third point is you can tell it's Sam saying it, because he then says, give me money, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't say that. He says, this is why we need such strong economic investment. And it's a good thing to say because of the whole DeepSeek risk of the AI bubble bursting, because they said that they developed these powerful models with such low resource and low cost. Now, what this points to is AI inclusivity, right? It's driving down the barriers of access to AI. And Sam doubles down and says anyone in 2035 should be able to marshal the same intellectual capacity as everyone today. So that's a single person. So you look at that and you think, wow, that's virtual.
But when you say everyone combined together.
Everyone
That's
combines.
just so people understand what that means. That's the definition of ASI, isn't it? Artificial superintelligence.
Yeah, so you'll have a genius at your fingertips, right? So
Yeah,
what it does is it's AI inclusivity, but even further than that, it's individual empowerment. And
yeah,
that's what the whole aim of OpenAI was to achieve. It was supposed to be a not-for-profit, and it was to be able to drive intelligence so everyone can use it. So we don't have this AI poverty or a disparity. The problem is that he then caveats that with we need to balance safety with empowerment. So
mm,
he's then saying we can't just give these things to people because you might have non-state actors which might use it in a rogue-like fashion, right? Now the problem with that is, and I was reading a book the other day, and it was talking about barons of the Gilded Age in America,
mm,
right? The
mm.
oil barons, and you can somewhat sense that here, because if you then remove individual empowerment and you give this to the big corporations or the incumbents or even the authorities to be able to leverage AI, and Sam was talking about compute budgets, we can actually allocate who gets access to AI, you then can start to create a monopoly, and you
Yeah.
don't want that.
And that's already happening, isn't
And
it?
this
To
is
some
why,
sense.
exactly, and this is why you started to have the Elon Musk pseudo offer of buying out OpenAI because they didn't want.
Yeah, see, we haven't even had time to go. We've covered it in the newsletter, but that's a whole other story, and that is like the ongoing soap opera. He puts this offer in for OpenAI, which is then flatly turned down in very soap opera style by Sam Altman, and now he's rescinded the offer as if to say, "Well, I didn't want it in the first place," and at the same time has now teased Grok 4, which he said is going to be the most powerful AI on Earth. So this is these big oil barons trying to get a one up on each other, isn't it?
Exactly, right. So it's an interesting take, and I think, but the good thing is you have to take it with a more positive spin and say that the intelligence we have that we can harness today is smarter. It's just a matter of democratizing that intelligence so people can use it in their daily lives, they can use it on their projects, they can use it at work, and they can use it in more effectively. So that's basically the aim of the game, and we'll see how that pans out. So then Sam then talks about GPT 4.5 and then GPT 5, and that's where you start to see this increasing
Now,
intelligence.
this was massive.
Yeah.
He announced this, but my reading of it is 4.5 is literally around the corner, like weeks away. So I'm just waiting for the announcement. And it's some interesting things that he talked about, that it's going to be the last was it a last chain of thought model?
No. The last non-reasoning model.
The last non-reasoning model, right? And when 5 comes out, it's going to be the last time. 4.5 is going to be the last time where we've got to go through this really clunky choosing which model to use. Everything is going to be brought together in GPT-5. And my reading of GPT-5 is that it's maybe months away. It doesn't seem like he's talking about. He shared this roadmap. He's saying 4.5 seems to be a bridge to 5, much like 3.5 was a bridge to 4. But how long after 3.5 did 4 come out? Not long. It was
No, it was
literally
quite
a
short.
few months.
It was a few months.
I think the same thing is going to happen. I think we'll get 4.5 and then a few months later 5. And his big thing that he said in this Twitter post was that we want AI just to work for you, because you remember when ChatGPT first came out, you didn't have to think about anything. You just went to it and you gave it a prompt and that was it. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a little bit of like, well, which model should I use? I know the reasoning ones aren't so good for kind of creative thinking. And then actually, do I want the canvas? Do I now need to use tasks? And you've got to make a decision, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. What 5's going to do, it's going to just, as he says, just work for you. It's going to work out what is the most appropriate model for the prompt that you've given.
Yeah,
So it's
and this,
another step towards this unified artificial intelligence approach.
yeah, and it's interesting because I actually touched on this in the blog that I wrote about the AI paradox, where I think I kind of said that there were all these different models like O1, O3, GPT-4o, and they say to use certain models for certain things, but in any task, if you want it done to the best, you're going to use the most powerful model anyway. So it makes sense for them to just actually division of labor, right? Divide the tasks that you need to be done across these models. And it's quite smart because this again lends to the idea of efficiency.
Yeah.
Because if they can route this in a smart way and say the task that the user has asked for can be done by GPT 4.0 or 4.5, right?
Yeah.
It will allocate the resource from that model. So then the compute costs aren't as heavy as if it would be if it was O1 running that. So it's a lot smarter. And we're seeing this across other sort of models as well, right? So Perplexity are doing something similar, and it's just a smarter, more efficient way of doing things. And I guess it stops the analysis paralysis you get in terms of choosing what model you want to use. So I think it's definitely a smart thing to do. But one thing that I still struggle with, right, is understanding the difference between these reasoning models and then traditional large language models, because they are still all large language models. And they say that GPT-5 will have elements of reasoning from the O series within them. And all it really is
Well,
is
they say they're getting rid of O3 won't be a standalone model. It will just be built into GPT-5.
it'll be built into the hardware. So it happens at the latter stage of processing, right?
Yeah,
It then starts to
exactly.
think, and it starts to have this chain of thought where you can get better outputs. And for people who are listening, that means the way you prompt these new models will be slightly different to how you're prompting them now.
Will it
It
be more
means
natural? Be more
it'll be more
natural, won't it?
natural, and you haven't got to prescribe instructions to it, because it'll be able to do it in a way that it thinks it's more efficient to give you output.
Yeah, so this is all good stuff, and it's, like I say, moving at pace as always. But you mentioned Perplexity there. Let's move on to the story about Perplexity, because we haven't talked about them for a while on the podcast. But given what we talked about deep research last week, which is amazing, but it's $200 per month. Out of the blue, what did Perplexity drop? They dropped their own deep research, right?
So they've dropped their own freemium version of Deep Research, and we've both tried it, and it is really good, but there are areas where it falls short.
It's not as good as OpenAI deep research, I think, is what I would say.
Yeah, it's not as good as OpenAI's Deep Research.
And it's powered by DeepSeek, isn't it?
Yes, I
Yeah.
think it's
So
powered by DeepSeek. Well, they've powered their models with a lot of things, right? They've got
yeah.
their new Sonar models, they've got DeepSeek. You can also use O3 Mini as well. But it is. Now, let me just to frame the level of output you get from Deep Research, right? Because I used it, and even though Perplexity like to say their unique selling point is their source accuracy, there are times when it might hallucinate and state facts that aren't actually facts or have
Yeah,
been
I found
verified.
that.
So you
I
have to
found
remember.
with me, I found that I asked it for research on a certain topic, and it came up with research that was done in 2027, as like so research in the future, and provided the citation for it, and provided the link, which went to some random link. So it definitely doesn't work as well as Open.
So this is the issue, right? Because effectively generative AI models or large language models are pattern matching. So if it's recognized the word 2027 and someone's worded it in a certain way, it can then infer that something's already happened. And then if it hasn't got if it hasn't got advanced reasoning behind that element as well, it will start to struggle and hallucinate. Because the one that I saw was, I think it said that Crossrail had 50,000 or so sensors for digital twins, and I don't think that was true.
Yeah,
But
it
I
does.
couldn't see anything anyway. But let me just show you. Let me just kind of talk to you a bit more about what the capability is like. When you come to write a report, what it can do really well is connect the dots. It can describe things in a very effective or conducive way to learn, and it has a lot of breadth. I would say it can link topics quite well. What it doesn't do though is critique very well. I don't think it looks at what these articles or research papers are glossing over, and that was something which I think is killer if you want to be able to really scrutinize and get the value of a lot of things. So it doesn't do
And
that.
that's what I think. But I think OpenAI's one does do that.
Yes, and also, is it because we're not prompting it properly? So with the deep research models now, then, is there going to be another form of prompt that you need to have to elicit a more comprehensive report? Because you're no longer looking for kind of short to mid-term content. You're looking at pages and pages and pages. So you can't really just give it a single question, right? I mean, you can, but how do you know that it will go into that level of depth as opposed to you actually giving it specific depth that you
Yeah.
are prescribed depth to the
And I also found you can't, if you do a follow-up prompt, it won't go and change it. It will kind of just answer that particular question in isolation. So, for instance, I went back on my query and said, well, you've cited stuff that doesn't even exist yet. It's in the future. And it created a whole new deep research piece on just that question. Maybe I've done something wrong there with the prompting, but it's not as intuitive. But the way around that, I think, is you take your answer, you can then put it into, 4.0 or something, and then start amending it from there, get it into our canvas mode, and then you can start editing it. So it's what we talked about quite a few times, is using these models together. So if you can't afford $200 a month for the deep research, you use the Perplexity one, which you get 5 free prompts is it a day or a week? I can't remember how often it is, but you get 5 free prompts, 5 free pieces of research, and it's still amazing. And then you can cut and paste that research, put it into 4.0, which is also free, and then go into Canvas and start editing it. So that's the way I would do it.
Yeah, and there's been some awesome use cases, and it has proven to be effective. In line with this, Perplexity are also trying to find their way through different AI opportunities, right? They know that they can't compete with the likes of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google on, core models, but they have just released a new Sonar model, and it is extremely fast, and it's what they call near instant responses. So people who
So
are
this is distinct from deep research, just to be clear.
yes, it's one of their core models, and so when you have reasoning models, the one issue with reasoning models is it takes time to think because it's deliberative. It's systems two thinking. So people might get frustrated with that. So when you want the system's one response, you want a really quick response back. This thing can give it to you in near instant speed. So it is really good. It's just if you're used to getting more comprehensive outputs now from reasoning models, it's not like that. So it feels like the old GPT-4. It's quite basic. Yeah. But it's good at what it does, right? That's what they're here, and it is good with source referencing as well. So Perplexity are trying to carve out their own vertical, their own niche, and I think they're doing it in the right way because it's cheaper than others.
Is it better than ChatGPT search? Because I find myself flipping between the two.
Kind of. Normal Perplexity is better, definitely, 100%. It's wider, it's got more sources. They don't really have these collaborations that OpenAI have, so they pull from various sources. But when you use Sonar itself, it is near instantaneous. It's rapid. It's so quick.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
So what I would say, look, if anyone hasn't tried Perplexity, we're big fans here. And I'm hearing more and more people talk about it. Actually, I've spoken to a lot of journalists over the course of the last week. And journalists, it seems to be their favoured tool because of the accuracy and the links. So do try out Perplexity because it's there's a free tier that everyone can use. And then you can try out deep research for, I think, $20 a month or something. And you get 5 free prompts to try it out with. So just go in and give it a go, I would say. So, like I said, there's so much to cover. I mean, the other big story that we're not really going to have time to cover because we've got to move on to the interview, but I'll just kind of very, very quickly summarise it, was the AI Playbook from the UK government. So that was another big step, and it kind of went under the radar a bit because it was such a big week for news. I'm not sure people are appreciating just how important it is, but the basis of it, and you can read up about it in the newsletter, is these core principles. And it's really about understanding the limitations of AI, which we talk a lot about. So a lot of it for people listening to this podcast, if you listen a long time, will be obvious stuff because we talk about it a lot. So it's more written for people who are just starting their journey in AI and making sure that they're being responsible and ethical. So it looks at understanding AI and its limitations. It looks at ethical and responsible use of AI. It looks at AI security and risk management. And it looks at AI lifecycle management. So making sure you're selecting the right AI tool for the right point in time, what have you. And then it does have some principles around collaboration and adoption. I'm really pleased it picked up on adoption because we know that is one of the big sticking points for the industry. So it's a really, really good read. Like I say, nothing in there probably that we haven't spoken about quite a lot before, but actually for the audience that it's aimed at, people maybe just starting with their AI journey, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, so I've actually not read that report yet, but let me guess. I bet you in there it does say AI is here to augment what we do and not replace us.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the standard line. And you kind of don't want to, even though we know that in reality with ASI, it is going to replace a lot of things. You don't want to deviate too much from that position because it's too much for people to understand. And like for anyone really, and we don't really know, we're guessing that's what's going to happen. The scaling could just stop, couldn't it? It's very possible that scaling is unlikely, but possible that scaling could just stop and we have another AI winter. So it's not definite that we're going to get to that point of mass displacement.
Well, it is possible because you're right. It's possible because Ilya has been away for the last year or 2 years or so and has said that, AI has a fossil fuel problem with data, right? So there is the potential that scaling can plateau because of it. Equally, I'm still in the camp that AI will elevate what we do, but I think there needs to be a change in mindset in terms of what it is we're doing and what sort of skills that we actually need, right? And again, Sam actually does mention this in his blog, and he says, and the one thing that I always mention is agency. You have to have the agency. Yeah. So if you've got all these AI tools out there and you've got all these tasks that you need to do, it is key, and the report is right. You need to find the right tool for the job. And you need to be able to have agency to try these different tools out and try them in different use cases and experiment with them. Agency, resilience, adaptability, effectively just problem solving, things that you have which just show you that you have a willingness to learn.
The human element of this all. That's
The
the bit.
human element of it. So it is true, but it's just when you hear the cliche, it's like it won't replace what you're doing now, but what do we need to do to evolve? And that's the conversation which you don't really hear enough of.
But you've got to take it one step at a time. There's no point in going to that other step for people who are just starting. So I understand the principle. This is about getting buy-in to something which is pretty scary for a lot of people, to be honest.
Yeah,
You know, it's if you talk to the average person in the street, and you talk about AI, they a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they do feel threatened by it. But that brings me, I mean, I put a little blog, and there's a link to that in the newsletter as well, around, I think the whole concept of companies or institutions are going to be what's most at risk. I think everyone in the future will be its own entrepreneur, because everyone will have 1,000 agents at their disposal. It's going to give everyone, well, it's agency, like you say, but it's going to give everyone the opportunity as well to do whatever they want to do.
exactly.
Literally.
And this is why the loop back to the start of this episode, JD Vance saying, you don't want to stifle the innovation from small startups, and B, going back to Sam's blog, you want to empower individuals. So it's all an interconnected point. But yeah, you're right, 100%.
That was a brilliant loop back to the beginning to end the pulse.
Go through the film comes through. It definitely does, and you can see it's a recurring theme now that people want to have their own lives they want to be able to control their own lives, right? Because we don't want to lose control, and we can gain control through AI. It's a virtuous cycle. You just need to know how to leverage it effectively.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you, Yoshi. Listen, we're going to have to cut it off there. There is so much more in the newsletter. Seriously, it's probably the biggest one we've had just because of the amount of big stories this week. We haven't even talked about Apple's humanoid robot that's coming out, and the new Claude's, the new Claude model, and the Meta. So there's still loads in there we haven't had a chance to get to. But we do want to go now to the brilliant interview we had with Nicola Benjamin. And stay tuned, because we've got a big announcement partway through that interview as well. So until next time, thank you, everyone. See you next week. Project Flux is here. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Nicola Benjamin, the CEO and founder at Project Management Global. And I'm especially excited about this one because later in the conversation, we're going to announce something really, really amazing that we're both really super pumped and excited about. But we'll leave you waiting for a little while until we get to that. So we're going to start off just by welcoming you, Nicola. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Brilliant. Thank you, James, and thanks, Yoshi, and thank you for that great introduction. Really exciting news to come later.
Yeah, we will definitely get to that. Before we go there, let's just talk about you, because you've got an incredible story, and you know what you've built with Project Management Global is amazing. It's one of my favorite project management sites. But you had a career in project management, didn't you? You were working with Arup and others, and then you moved on to finding Project Management Global. What was that kind of defining moment for you that made you make that switch so that you could start Project Management Global? Because it's not an easy thing to switch from a career in practice to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So I've been a project manager, or when I started Project Management Global, I'd been in the business for about 25 years. So I'd pretty much seen just about everything that could happen to a project manager, in particular kind of your career highs and lows. And I think really that was probably the kind of the first prompt that made me realise that actually, as a profession, we're probably not getting things 100% right for the people and practitioners within it. So I think there wasn't one defining moment. I'm going to give you two, actually. So the first was the conversation I was having with sort of fellow project managers, and I think it was really recognizing the kind of level of dissatisfaction around kind of how people were being supported in their career development. And I remember one particular week I'd had the same conversation with 5 different project managers, all at varying stages of their career. And I thought to myself, actually, I'm not going to have this conversation for the 6th time. I'm going to write down the kind of mentoring advice that I was given. And if somebody asks me again, I'll just point them to this blog.
Yeah.
So that really was the genesis of kind of how I started the kind of the first version of Project Management Global. And it was a really, really kind of, every Sunday afternoon I'd pick an area of discussion that I'd had that week with colleagues, and then I wrote it down, and then I just published it out into the world. And it was one of those things, never expected kind of more than sort of a handful of people to ever see it, but very quickly it grew to kind of thousands, which is incredible to think of now. Because people just kind of joining once a week just to look at one question. It was really very unsophisticated. And then the second moment, and this is the one that made me kind of jump and decide that I was going to kind of do this seriously and it not be kind of a thing that I did on the side, was I had a really uncomfortable conversation at work. And at the time, I was a consultant with Arup, absolutely loved my job, great sector that I was working in. So I was in the rail infrastructure sector, great organisation. But it suddenly occurred to me, you're at the mercy of this kind of cyclical nature of the consultancy business. And we'd had a really, really hard year. I'd worked my socks off, as had most of my colleagues. And then, of course, you have your annual review, and it's kind of, well, you've done okay. And I thought to myself, actually, no, I've done more than okay. I'd actually worked. I'd lost count of the hours that I'd put into this. And I thought to myself, it was kind of, I could sort of put my head down and, work for another year really hard. But then I thought to myself, I had no headroom. There was no capacity for doing anything more. And I suddenly thought to myself, looking ahead at my career, you've got 10 years of this ahead of you. And I just thought, I really want to do something different. I want to be able to put in all of those hours and then see an output that I'm really proud of, and that I can look back and say, yeah, this is great, and you can see the results of that. Yeah. I just wasn't getting that where I was. So I went home that evening, and I think after a bit of a kind of a stiff talking to myself and saying, okay, pull yourself together, I put a plan, true project management fashion, in terms of how was I going to create something that could give me a good out of the position that I was in and do it relatively quickly. And, it was one of those things. Within 24 hours, I had a blueprint and a plan for what I was going to do. And I think it was sort of within a 2-month period, I'd identified the business plan, I'd found co-founders, I'd worked out the financial model. I'd spoken to my employer at the time and said, okay, how can I get some time off so that I'm able to do this? And then how can I do this in a sustainable way? So it was triggered by one conversation that made me say, actually, I've got to do something different here.
Well, what an amazing story. But the fact is, you had that option because you had built this thing it was called The Career Whisperer, wasn't it? Your original publication. The fact that you had built that totally organically, because you were trying to help, because you were trying to answer people's questions, enabled you to have this option, which is a big lesson there for people, is that these side hustles can give you options in the future as well.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right, James. And I think looking back now, what I realised that sort of side hustle period allowed me to do was really validate and test the marketplace.
Yeah. And that's not everyone's got the luxury of doing that, because sometimes they're put straight into it and everything is dependent on that. So, yeah, definitely, if you've got a side hustle or something you want to do or something that you're passionate about, go for it.
But also, just James, there quickly though, just on that, Nicola, because there's a saying that necessity is the mother of innovation, right? And I guess in your case, scarcity was the father of constraint, right? You didn't have the time to do it. So what was the light bulb moment when you said, I have to give my time to this?
So it was that conversation with my line manager, and it was the realization that, one, I was putting a lot, huge amounts of effort into my day job, and I suddenly thought to myself, wow, if I could put that effort somewhere else. It was that kind of realization. It was instant. I suddenly, it was just a penny just dropped that I needed to put that level of effort and just time into something that really, really mattered to me, and I really thought that the industry needed.
So cool. Now that you switched from like that consultant to running a bit of business and a growing business at that, what's the most unexpected lesson that you've learned so far as a leader?
I guess it's the number of tough decisions that you have to make. I think when you're kind of you're sitting back as, not somebody in the C-suite, you just
Yeah.
assume it's like every now and again, once a quarter, you've got kind of a big decision that you have to take. Yeah, it couldn't be more different. Every single day, by the hour, you're taking big decisions, and it's just those series of right decisions that makes your business work. And to a certain extent, what happens is that you start getting more comfortable in
Mm,
that really kind of complex space where you're having to kind of hourly make really difficult decisions. And I think
yeah.
the other thing is switching between sort of different aspects of the role. Obviously, being a startup, you are very, very hands-on. But one minute you're kind of creating content, next thing I'm doing the financing, next thing I'm, hiring people.
You're everything.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was that level of you go into sort of starting a business thinking you're going to be doing the thing that you love, and then you very quickly realise that that's just one aspect of the job, and the rest of it is kind of all the things to make the business work.
Yeah, right. Okay. And you got to let a lot of the things that you love go to, you got to, as we talked about with another guest recently, you either got to automate, delegate, or eliminate, right? So
Yeah,
that you make sure you're doing the right thing at the
yeah,
right time, which brings us really nicely onto AI, because that's what this show's about.
yeah,
And of course, as a PM publication, you are talking about AI quite a lot. And you recently posted an amazing giveaway. It was a prompt guide in AI project delivery. So we'll put that in the show notes. So having seen all this stuff start to happen over the course of the last few years, how do you see AI shaping the role of the project manager maybe over the next few years?
yeah. Well, I'm in the camp that I'm super excited by this, and I know there's a lot of kind of concern and worry as to how it's going to impact the industry. I actually think it's one of the most exciting things to happen to us. I
Hmm.
think it's going to be a fantastic tool. I think it's going to be like most tools that you have in project management. You use it when it's appropriate to do so. But
Yeah.
in honesty, we couldn't do much of our work without the tools that we have and that we've created. And I think in 2, 3, 4 years time, that's exactly the position that we'll be in within AI. The issue is we don't understand it well enough, and we don't recognise yet how it's going to be helping us, and what position it's going to take in terms of its role. But that's something that we need to figure out. It's not a reason for us to not go forward and do it.
No, exactly. And that's what you do, and also what we do is all about that. It's educating people and giving them the tools that they need to be able to use these things. So what would you say to those? Because there are quite a lot of them in the industry, because we've got a very traditional kind of clientele, if you like, who say, this stuff's going to take my job. It's a threat to me personally. Judging by your previous comment, you don't see it like that. So what would you say to those people if they said that to you?
So the first thing I would say is you're probably having that position because you don't understand it well enough. So I think my first response is always to say you've got to take that first step and dig in and try to understand the technology as it's happening. The worst position to be in is that you're in the profession and AI is done to you. And even worse than that is it's done past you. Anybody kind of in the industry at the moment that's kind of sort of sitting there thinking, right, what do I need to do? You need to get to grips with it. You need to understand it. You need to become comfortable with it.
Hmm.
This isn't the first wave of technology that's hit an industry. The industry doesn't disappear. What happens is the individuals that haven't been able to get hold of it and understand it, they disappear. So for me, it's kind of you've got to decide what camp do you want to be in. The other thing that I would want to sort of tell people is not to be afraid of it. I think, sometimes when you're listening to some of the conversations around AI and project management, there's this assumption that everybody knows more than you do.
Hmm.
And actually, as an industry, we're all figuring this out. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So don't feel that, oh my God, I'm not smart enough to do this, or I'm not in the right organisation and they're not using it, or everybody knows and they're miles ahead of me. It's the complete opposite. I'm very aware of some incredibly advanced sort of organisations, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing with AI and digital and data. It's very easy to speak a lot and give the impression that you know what's going on. The industry is pretty much all in the same boat. We're all figuring this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I will say, though, in my opinion, project management has got some catching up to do with some of the other industries. I think we've definitely been slower to really take on board that this is something that can help us.
Yeah, we don't want it. There's some terrible stats about how, undigitized we are as an
Yeah.
industry. So it's no surprise. So, Yoshi, I think you had a question.
Yeah. So, Nicola, when you started PM Global, you've had to cover a breadth of skills, right, and different functions. And with the way that AI is going, within project management, we're likely to see a convergence of functions. So you should be able to have a project manager which can, conduct some risk management, some scheduling, understanding cost more effectively. So I guess for you, do you see some similarities where if you were to use AI, it could help you scale your business doing all of these functions? And then can you see some similarities with how that would help a project manager?
Let me unpack that. So the great thing about AI is it can be used in a spectrum of different ways. And if you think about kind of how project management exists, that's precisely what it is. So AI lends itself very well to the profession anyway. So I think that's the first kind of great fit for the project management. I agree with you. I mean, I look at sort of what I've done in the business, and the thing that really amazes me is that as one individual, I've been able to kind of produce, publish, distribute all of this content. There is absolutely no way that I could not do that without the technologies, the data that I'm now able to access, and the AI support that I've got. And that can be as simple as kind of, understanding the marketplace and being able to kind of get information that is so critical to me incredibly quickly, as well as being able to kind of take the knowledge that I have and being able to augment that and broaden it to such a point that actually I can, get incredibly deep understanding in areas that I would have had to have maybe sort of worked in for 5 years previously. Suddenly you've got access to that at your fingertips. But coming back to that piece around the kind of the prompt, you need to have that understanding in terms of what you are looking for and asking the right questions. And the interesting thing about that is you need the domain expertise and experience to be able to have that. So this thing where people think, the AI is going to do it by itself, it absolutely can't. It needs a human with expertise to be able to shape the direction it's going to go in.
Exactly. Someone's got to give it the context, got to give it the role, got to answer its questions, because we had another guest on recently who says, the way you should treat AI is as a thought partner and get it to ask you questions. Well, if you don't understand your business, you're not going to be able to answer those questions about what they want. But it's really encouraging to hear how you're using it. And we've covered in the podcast a few times that this concept of micro companies, the fact that a very small company or even a one-person company will soon have the power of potentially thousands of agent employees doing stuff for them, enabling them to scale and grow at a rate that they never would have dreamed of before. So for you as a founder of as a startup, that must make you quite excited that you can leverage this technology going forward.
Yeah, 100%. And so, I mean, it's really funny. So a few years ago, I had a presentation from Deloitte, I think it was at the time, and it was their future insights team had come to do a talk to me. And they said their greatest risk to their business is not their competitors, not other sort of big consultancies, but it's the 13-year-old young student in their room in a developing country somewhere who will have exactly the same access to all of these technologies that they do as an entire organization. And I remembered hearing that, and it was probably 2019. And I remember listening to that and thinking, wow, one, he knows something that I don't. Two, we're about to have an absolute wave of something that's going to hit us. And I think, if you think back, that was probably about 6 years ago. We absolutely had no concept really of AI kind of as a layperson in the street. But I just remember thinking, this is probably, an incredibly senior individual at Deloitte who's clearly got a great view of kind of what's coming. And he looked incredibly worried to me. And I just remembered at the time, I thought, right, I'm going to keep an eye on that space, because there is some kind of a leveling technology that is kind of on its way. And to me, that's exactly what we have here. See, I see this technology as a leveling force across industries.
Yeah. It basically democratizes knowledge, doesn't it? So these professions, and the APM's a great one, and RICS for surveyors, but they were the gatekeepers effectively of knowledge.
Yeah.
To get access to that knowledge, you had to. That's going to change, because everyone's got access to the knowledge for free. But like you say, you still need someone to ask and answer the questions. So it's just going to change the professions. And I like to see, some professions are doing better than others. I think the APM are doing a pretty good job of trying to get people to understand and trying to change. There's other professions, and I will mention the architecture profession and maybe the law profession, that aren't, they're even more traditional than us in a lot of ways. So it's going to be
But
really
you
interesting.
mentioned something there as well then, and Nicola, you kind of touched on this point. I was reading the Sam Altman blog, the 3 Observations blog that just came across recently, and in it he said that by 2035, a single person will have the equivalative intelligence of everyone today in 2025, because you have access to all of this information. So the idea that we can open source AI and anyone can be using it with effectively having a smart genius at your fingertips is going to change the game. It's going to change the world, in fact.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, as I said, it's one of the most exciting technologies I think that will have happened to us as a human race, to be honest. But it's interesting what you say in terms of you will have access to an incredibly smart person, but that smart person isn't necessarily going to know what it's doing. It needs somebody to give it the context, to give it the meaning to what it's doing. And one of the best analogies that I've heard is it's like having the smartest intern that you will ever have. They're an incredibly smart person. They are still an intern. You, as the senior person, has the access still to be able to utilize it and to be able to leverage that incredible intelligence. So for me, that's where we still have that opportunity, both as individuals and as industries, to kind of have that level of control in terms of how we're going to manage it. And I think actually I'm not one of those individuals that are kind of saying that we are at that point where, the technology is going to be able to sort of, have control itself and get what it's called now. Sorry.
AGI, ASI.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. So I don't believe we're close to the point where we've got AGI yet. I think that's some way off. It'll be interesting. I think it's going to be a really interesting journey to see as we approach it. But we're nowhere near there at the minute.
I like the word you mentioned there, meaning. I think humans give these tasks and these goals meaning, and I think that's that key component.
And the whole AGI conversation is changing all the time, because they keep changing the definition of it. So they can say, yeah, we are AGI. That's just because you've changed the definition of it. So that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, you're right. What this comes down to for me, Nicola, is you still need great leadership. You still need somebody, when it comes to project delivery, making the decisions and talking to the AI and getting the most out of it. And the best project managers will get better at being project managers by utilizing these tools, and the worst project managers will get worse. Or in fact, they're the ones who will have their jobs at risk, because they will not only be a bad project manager, but they'll also not have the superpower of these tools. So it's going to be a really interesting time over the course of the next few years, for sure. And I'm sure it'll all be covered in Project Management Global as well. So keep your eye out.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, I'm a great believer that the foundational skills as a project manager, you can't move away from that. And it's really interesting now. I think what I'm seeing AI do is really help you kind of to bed down in those kind of foundational skills, great project planning, great execution, all of those kind of core tenets. I think the piece where I'm seeing kind of separate out really great project managers is some of those soft skills, where again it's the human aspect that delivers it. It's that intuition when you're talking with sponsors and stakeholders. It's being able to communicate and manage your teams really well. It's that ability to kind of negotiate changes in terms of dependencies. Now, the AI can give you the information so that you can make better decisions, but it still comes down to kind of your, I guess, experience and intuition
And
to an extent.
emotional intelligence, I think, is a really important part as well, that I don't think AI is going to get close to anytime soon, because it's such a human instinct to be able to read someone's body language, and that kind of just picking up on someone, they don't feel quite right, that doesn't feel quite right, that, or they could say all the right things, and if you put that transcript or even that video into AI, it would say, yeah, everything's fine, but as a human there's something that they said, the way that they kind of smiled or didn't smile, that they're not going to be able to pick up on. And as a good project manager, you need those skills, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the actions then that you then take as a result of it. So the AI can capture that transcript, but it won't be able to say, do you know what, let's pop for a coffee so we can make sure that we're all on the same page there. At no point can I see a piece of AI being able to do that. Even, and let's just give it that it can work out the body language and the inference in the conversation of transcripts. You still need that kind of person to person sort of relationship developing, and also that ability to say, here's where I decide that I need to do that piece of relationship building, or I need to call somebody else in that has a better relationship with this individual, or maybe this isn't the person that I need to deal with at this point in time. To be able to, I guess, teach a piece of tech that level of nuance in terms of how you manage human nature. I mean, I can't even imagine the level of technology that's going to be required to do that. I'm sure it's achievable. I just don't think we're anywhere near there at the minute.
Yeah, and I say to people, just don't worry about that. You've got to go once. Maybe we will get there, and maybe the humanoid robots and all that will give people companionship. But let's just concentrate on what's in front of you over the next couple of years. I say, just enjoy that. Brilliant. I want to move on now, because there's something I'm really excited to announce to the listeners, and I know you are as well, Nicola. We're launching a partnership next week that really, really excites me, because to be able to get to your readers with the stuff that we're doing around AI, and for us to be able to promote what you're doing, I think is just such an obvious thing that can help everyone that we touch with our various publications. But what excites you most about our little collaboration?
So again, I think I developed Project Management Global because I wanted to give the tools to help people firstly do their jobs better as project managers and to grow professionally. And I think now, when you look at kind of, the scope firstly for AI and just how important it will be going forward, I think it's an area that if you are really serious about kind of growing, and developing in this area, that to me, you can't do without. So it had always featured in the articles that we were doing, but it's great for me now to be able to partner with two individuals that absolutely know this subject inside out. And for me, I just think it's an incredible opportunity for our subscribers to really get the kind of inside track in terms of what's going on. And it's moving so quickly, which is why you actually need a podcast like yourself that is kind of absolutely monitoring literally day to day what's happening in terms of the developments. Yeah. And with the best will in the world, we're a very broad publication in terms of what's happening in project management. We're looking at multiple sectors, we're looking at multiple domains within those sectors, and we're looking at multiple skill sets as project managers. AI is just one aspect. So for me, and what this partnership allows us to do is it provides another tool in that tool set for our readers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just one thing that I really like about Project Management Global as well. We had a conversation a while back, and it's that you aren't precious about gatekeeping the information, or only curating your own content and giving it out. When you see kind of a vertical, or you see a really key point or part of information that people need to learn within a certain sector, you just link to that person's stuff. And I really like that modesty when you share that information, because it means that people are always getting access to the best information that we can see.
And thank you, Yoshi, for that. That again was a founding principle of what we were doing. Because to be honest, I don't know everything that's going on in project management. And I think actually one of the areas and one of the things that I was always really disappointed about in the industry as it stood was that we had great content out there, but it was always coming from a certain perspective. It was always somebody trying to sell their certification, or they were trying to sell a standard that they were doing, or they had a product that they want to sell. And as a result of that, you as the kind of practitioner just spent half your life kind of hopping between these different, institutions and associations and certification providers, instead of thinking, actually, if we're a kind of an industry that's really sort of wanting to gel together and really wanting to provide the best platform for its users, then actually what we should do is harmonize all of this information, this content. And for me, that was the biggest gap that I saw.
Yeah.
To me, we're still not a harmonized industry. And I think actually if we're really going to progress and we're really going to give the people the tools that they need to progress in their careers, then we need to do it in a harmonized way. So, as I said, our first principle was that firstly, we were going to be a force for good for project management and for project managers in the industry. And that force for good is about kind of giving people the tools and the information and the insight that they need to make the best decision for their projects, for their organizations, but really importantly for themselves and for their careers.
And I think it is, obviously you're a business, but it always feels with what you do is you're giving really valuable information away. And even before I met you, and I'm not sure if you know this, but I can prove it, is that we were linking to your Project Management Global from Project Flux, even all the way back when we started. So it's kind of cool. It's really, what you've achieved with Project Management Global is amazing. And I think, there's lots of amazing resources out there. There's obviously Project Management Global. We like to think Project Flux fills a gap as well. But I also wanted to give a shout out to like Project Chatter, which is Del Foong's podcast. And then you've got things like Gen AI, which is another podcast, which is more kind of technical on the AI. But it's all out there. If you're a project manager, I mean, I know everyone's very overworked, but if you just read Project Management Global, listen to Project Chatter and listen to Project Flux, you'll be halfway there. Like, honestly, you get so much good information just from that. So it's out there, and that's what I think we're trying to fill that gap together, aren't we?
Yeah.
And then the main thing is there, and the main thing, James, and I think Nicola touched on it, is perspective. I think when you have associations, you can write from a very similar or a uniform perspective, but having all of these things within your network gives you a different perspective on all those different angles. So I think you can take away people's different characters and the different viewpoints, and I think that is essential for learning how to carve your way out through this information age.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, the other thing is, being a project manager can be quite a lonely profession. It's great if you're on a project that you have got other people that you're working with. But, there are so many times you're, either working as an independent contractor or you're moving in between kind of roles. And I think it's actually quite a lonely period. So for me, kind of creating what I hope is a community for project managers, that even if it's, you're coming together under, that guise of kind of developing, I think it kind of fills that gap in terms of, you're not in it by yourself. And actually, it's even bigger than sort of, just the engineering sector or just the, infrastructure sector. There is so much that's going on in project management. And I think, I always felt that we were kind of very narrow in our thinking, and I just really kind of wanted people to kind of recognize that we are a much broader, much richer industry than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, that's true. We make incredible things, right? And we talk about all the bad things, and yes, projects are late and they're over budget, etc. And AI is going to help with all that, of course. But actually, the end result, the things that we produced as a profession, is absolutely amazing. Yeah. So all I can say to people is, just pause the podcast right now. Go on to. Do you want to give the web address for people who can go to for Project Management Global?
Yeah, so we are projectmanagementglobal.co.uk. So if you type that in, just put it into Google, you'll find us.
And it will be in the show notes as well, but I thoroughly recommend it. So thank you, Nicola. I just want to, just before we wrap up, just a couple kind of more personal questions, if you like. So you've had an amazing career, right? You've done it all. You've worked in one of the greatest consultancies, and now you're running your own business. But if you weren't in project management, what career do you think you might have pursued? What did you want to be as a little girl?
So looking back, I think actually I was always going to be a project manager. It's a sad but true story, but I think I remember being about 8 years old, and as you do, you have all your friends over because they're hanging out at your house for the afternoon. And I remember, and my dad always reminds me, but I'd set the living room table up as a boardroom, and I set out an agenda for everybody. Basically, I look back now, it's so sad, but yeah, everybody had a sheet of A4 paper. They had a pen and pencil, glass of water, because
You
you don't want to
literally
get a
played
dry
project
thought.
manager.
I know, I was playing project manager at 8, so I
Wow.
I actually think it was always going to be. I don't know if I could have been anything else, I think I probably would have loved to go into the aviation industry, and I secretly would have loved to be a pilot. And I'm still a unashamed plane spotter. Absolutely love it. I watch Big Jet TV is my favourite Saturday morning podcast watching. So,
well, there's still time when Project Management Global takes over the world, and you've got everyone else running that for you. You can do your pilot's license, right?
Yeah. And can I just say, actually, and would typically always get a plug in for the aviation industry, but there are so many great parallels, and the one thing I absolutely love about that industry is how willing they are to learn, particularly when things go wrong. And I think, for me, I love that about that industry. And again, it's about that openness. It's about kind of wanting to absolutely excel and do the best at all times, but recognizing that actually to do that, you have to be humble enough to kind of see where those mistakes and those risks are happening, and then kind of be inclusive enough to ask the whole industry to step on board of making the solutions.
You're so right, because when things go wrong in the aviation, obviously it's disastrous. But equally, when things go wrong in our industry, and we only got to look not too many years ago to Grenfell, it's also disastrous. But we don't seem to learn from it. We seem to make the same mistakes over and over again. But I don't want to end on a negative, so I do want to ask one more question before we go, which is: so what's one personal habit that has transformed your productivity over time? That could be AI. It could be having a glass of water in the morning, but we always like to find out what people's life hacks are.
Yeah, I am an absolute list maker and note taker. I am trying to modernise my approach a bit and having a look at kind of some of the AI technologies to help me. The problem is that I find it really hard to change. So like most project managers hate change. If you could see me at my desk now, you'd see a pile of notebooks, and I know that there's a million different AI tools that I could be using. It would be so much more kind of efficient to use.
But there's something about writing, isn't there? There's something very therapeutic about. There's someone who told me you type from your head and you write from your heart. And I find that really, really true. Have you tried one of the e-ink things? Because I bought myself one of those Remarkables, which is a lovely halfway house.
Yeah. So that is on my Christmas list for next year. I think that's
we know what to buy you.
It's exactly what I need. But you're absolutely right. There's something about that kind of writing and that kind of seeing as well as kind of feeling what you're putting down on that page that kind of gives it a different kind of position in terms of your memory. So yeah, but for me, it's about kind of, I always take notes when I'm sort of having conversations with people. I love to have that record, and also kind of making lists. Again, I think it's kind of human nature to kind of want to achieve that. I've done this, I can tick it off, and I can move on to something else. And I always tell my children, it's just like, give yourself a list, and you do a couple of things on it, you'll have achieved something that day. So there is something around kind of making those lists, prioritizing, and then crossing them off when you've done it.
I'm a list maker as well. I drive my wife mad. In fact, whenever I've done something wrong, she goes, "Why don't you put it on your bloody list?" Because it's always the thing you forget to put on your list, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there you go. Nicola, what can we say? Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I am so excited about, what we're going to try and do together and help each other. And because of that, no doubt you'll be on the podcast a heck of a lot more over the course of the next few months. So everyone can get used to seeing, and if you're on YouTube, or hearing from Nicola. But thank you so much for coming on, and we will definitely see you soon. Do you have any kind of final words for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, it's just been an absolute pleasure. I mean, we sort of started having some really great conversations a few months ago, and I will say, I've just felt so enriched, and listening to the podcast, talking to you both, I think the level of knowledge that you have in this area, I always say I read one of your blogs and I feel instantly smarter. I feel like, oh my God, I could not have had my next meeting without knowing that piece of information. So I'm just really, really happy. Firstly, that I sort of came across your podcast in the first instance, and then secondly, to kind of have the opportunity to work with you both. I'm just absolutely brilliant.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Yay! Take care.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want, so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.